When I discovered my husband's family poisoned my daughter to force me into signing over my billion-dollar empire, I realized this wasn't about money. It was about destroying me completely. What I uncovered next about their dark secrets made me question everything I thought I knew about the people I trusted before I reveal the shocking truth about how far some people will go for money. Smash that like button if you're ready for a story that will leave you speechless. Subscribe because what happens next involves family secrets, medical conspiracies, and revenge that goes deeper than you could ever imagine. My name is Leah, and 3 years ago, I thought I had everything. I was 34, the founder and CEO of Medical Technologies, a medical AI company worth $900 billion. I had a husband I adored named Thomas. And most importantly, I had my beautiful 3-year-old daughter, Aliyah, who was the light of my entire world. I built Medicore from absolutely nothing. I'm talking about coding in my college dorm room at 2 in the morning, living off ramen noodles and pure determination. My company revolutionized how doctors diagnose diseases using artificial intelligence. And it changed millions of lives. But the thing I was most proud of wasn't the money or the recognition. It was coming home every day to Aliyah's smile and Thomas's warm hugs. Thomas came from what you'd call old money. The Sterling family had been wealthy for generations with their massive estate in Connecticut and their carefully curated social circles. When we first met at a business conference, I was honestly intimidated by his background. But Thomas seemed different from other wealthy men I'd encountered. He was genuinely interested in my work. He listened when I talked about my dreams, and most importantly, he fell in love with Aliyah the moment he met her. The Sterling family welcomed us with what I thought was open arms. Thomas's mother, Helen, would always bring special treats for Aliyah when she visited. His father, Robert, would ask thoughtful questions about my business. His sister, Caroline, seemed excited to have a new sister-in-law. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged to a real family. I had grown up with just my mom, and she passed away when Aliyah was born. So, having grandparents and aunts around felt like a blessing. But then things started changing in ways that made my stomach turn cold with fear. Aliyah began getting sick after family visits. At first, I thought it was just normal toddler stuff. Maybe she was picking up germs from other kids or adjusting to new foods, but these weren't ordinary childhood illnesses. My vibrant, energetic daughter would become lethargic and lose her appetite completely. She'd have strange stomach pains that made her cry for hours. I took her to the best pediatricians in the country. Ran every test imaginable, but nobody could figure out what was wrong with my baby. The worst part was watching this happy, curious little girl become a shadow of herself. She stopped playing with her toys, stopped laughing at cartoons, stopped running around the house like she used to. Some days she was so weak she could barely lift her head off the pillow. I was terrified I was going to lose the most important person in my life. And I had no idea why this was happening. During this nightmare period with Aliyah's health, something strange started happening with Thomas's family. Instead of being supportive during our crisis, they began making suggestions that felt completely wrong. Helen kept insisting I was too stressed about the business and that it was affecting Aliyah's health. Robert started giving me lectures about how successful women often neglect their families. Thomas, who had always supported my career, suddenly began agreeing with them. Maybe you should consider stepping back from medical for a while. He said one evening as we sat in Aliyah's hospital room, the stress can't be good for any of us. I stared at him in disbelief. This was my life's work, my company that was helping millions of people worldwide. And he wanted me to abandon it during our family's darkest hour. But I was so exhausted and terrified about Aliyah that I started questioning myself. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was pushing too hard and somehow causing my daughter's mysterious illness. That's when the Sterling family made their move. And it was calculated in a way that still makes my blood run cold. We were sitting in the hospital cafeteria during one of Aliyah's longest stays when Thomas looked at me with what I now realize was completely fake concern. Leah, my family has been talking and we think there's a solution that could help everyone. I was so desperate for anything that might help my daughter that I immediately leaned forward. What kind of solution? Robert cleared his throat in that pompous way of his. We think Thomas should have 50% ownership of Medicare for family stability. You understand? This way you can focus on Aaliyah's health while Thomas handles the business pressures. I felt like someone had slapped me across the face. They were sitting here in a hospital where my child was fighting some unknown illness, asking me to hand over half of everything I had built. But they presented it so smoothly with such apparent concern for our family's well-being that for a moment I actually considered it. Think about it, dear Helen added, reaching across to pat my hand. You've been carrying such a heavy burden. Let Thomas help carry some of that weight. But something in her eyes made me pause. There was a coldness there that I had never noticed before. A calculating look that made every instinct I had scream that something was terribly wrong. That night, while Aaliyah slept fitfully in her hospital bed, I made a decision that probably saved both our lives. I couldn't shake the feeling that her illness and their sudden business interest were somehow connected. So, I did something that might seem paranoid to some people, but felt absolutely necessary to me as a mother. I secretly arranged for independent medical testing. What I discovered destroyed my entire world and rebuilt it in the same moment. The independent lab results showed that Aaliyah had been systematically poisoned with small doses of a rare toxin over the course of several months. Someone had been deliberately making my baby sick, and the timeline perfectly matched the Sterling family visits. I sat in my car in that hospital parking lot, staring at those test results. And I felt something inside me die and something else entirely take its place. I immediately hired a private investigator and installed hidden security cameras throughout our house. What I found over the next 2 weeks was so horrifying that I still have nightmares about it. The cameras caught Helen adding a clear liquid to Aaliyah's juice cup during her visits. The private investigator discovered that the Sterling family wasn't just old money. They were old debt. They had been living off borrowed money and fake investments for years, maintaining their lifestyle through increasingly desperate schemes. But the most shocking discovery was that this wasn't Thomas's first time doing this. His previous wife, a successful architect named Jennifer, had died in what was ruled an accidental fall down the stairs. This happened just 2 weeks after she refused to add Thomas to her business accounts. The investigator found evidence suggesting that Jennifer's death wasn't an accident and that the Sterling family had done this before to multiple wealthy women who married into their family. I realized with absolute clarity that Aaliyah and I weren't just being manipulated, we were being set up to die. The final piece of evidence came when I planted listening devices throughout the Sterling mansion. What I heard during their family dinner made me understand that I was dealing with people who had moved far beyond greed into something much darker. Once she signs the papers, we need to make sure there are no loose ends. Robert's voice came through crystal clear on the recording. The accident needs to look natural, just like with Jennifer. What about the child? Caroline asked. Tragic loss, Helen responded without any emotion. Mother and daughter, car accident, perhaps. Very sad. But Thomas will inherit everything as the grieving widower. Thomas's voice was the one that broke whatever was left of my heart. How long do we wait after the signing? A month, maybe 2. We don't want it to look suspicious. They were planning to murder me and my 3-year-old daughter after stealing my company. These people who I had welcomed into our lives, who I had trusted with my child, who had sat at our dinner table and pretended to love us, were discussing our deaths like a business transaction. But here's the thing about underestimating someone. It can be the biggest mistake you ever make. I stopped the poisoning immediately by switching to only food. I prepared myself and keeping Aaliyah away from family visits. I told them she was too sick for visitors, which gave me time to plan. Within days, my daughter started showing signs of recovery, which confirmed everything I suspected. Then I did something that probably saved our lives. I started playing the broken woman they expected me to become. I called Thomas crying, telling him I couldn't handle the stress anymore and that maybe his family was right about me stepping back from the business. I acted like the pressure had finally cracked me, like I was ready to sign over everything just to make the pain stop. The Sterling family immediately began planning what they thought would be their victory celebration. I think it's best for everyone, I told Thomas through fake tears. Aaliyah needs me to focus on being a mother, not a CEO. The relief in his voice was disgusting. "You're making the right choice, honey. My family will take good care of the business." While they planned their celebration dinner, I was working with federal investigators who had been building a case against the Sterling family for months. It turned out that Jennifer's suspicious death had already caught the attention of law enforcement, and my evidence was exactly what they needed to move forward. The night of their planned signing ceremony, I walked into the Sterling mansion carrying fake documents and wearing a wire. The FBI was positioned around the property, and every word was being recorded. Aaliyah was safely in protective custody with agents who specialized in protecting children. Helen had prepared a special dinner to celebrate, and I watched with sick fascination as she tried to add something to what she thought was Aaliyah's juice cup. But my daughter wasn't there, and hidden cameras captured every second of her attempted final poisoning. To family, Robert raised his glass as I pretended to sign the fake papers. To family, I agreed, looking each of them in the eye. That's when Thomas's phone rang. With news that would destroy their lives forever. FBI, search warrant, everyone on the ground. The raid was swift and decisive. Robert, Helen, Caroline, and Thomas were all arrested simultaneously on charges of attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and in Thomas's case, suspected murder in his first wife's death. The evidence was overwhelming. The poisoning, the recorded conversations, financial records showing their debts and connections to other suspicious deaths of wealthy women who had married into prominent families. As they were being led away in handcuffs, Helen looked at me with pure hatred and screamed, "You have no idea what you've done to this family." I looked right back at her and said, "I know exactly what I've done. I've stopped you from killing any more innocent people." The investigation revealed that the Sterling family had been running this scheme for over 20 years, targeting successful women who married their sons, manipulating them into signing over assets, and then arranging their deaths to look accidental. At least 5 other women had died under suspicious circumstances, and their cases were immediately reopened. Thomas was charged with first-degree murder in Jennifer's death, and all of them face life sentences for the conspiracy against Aaliyah and me. The media called them the Black Widow family, though I always thought that was unfair to actual black widow spiders who only kill when they feel threatened. Today, Aaliyah is 5 years old and completely healthy. The poison has left her system entirely, and she's back to being the bright, energetic little girl she was always meant to be. She doesn't remember much about being sick, which I consider a blessing. We moved across the country to start fresh, and I've never looked back. Medical Technologies continues to thrive and has saved millions more lives through early disease detection. I kept 100% ownership of my company because it was never theirs to take. The Sterling family legacy is destroyed forever. Their name associated with murder and greed instead of prestige and old money. Sometimes people ask me how I stayed strong during that nightmare. And the answer is simple. I'm a mother. When someone threatens your child, you discover strength you never knew you had. When I realized that Aaliyah's life was in danger, every other consideration became irrelevant. I would have done anything, sacrificed anything, destroyed anyone to keep her safe. The thing that still amazes me is how perfectly their plan would have worked if I hadn't trusted my maternal instincts. If I had ignored that voice in my head telling me something was wrong with my daughter's illness, if I had accepted their explanations and their demands, Aaliyah and I would both be dead right now. They would have inherited my billion-dollar company and moved on to their next victim. But they made one crucial mistake. They underestimated a mother's love and a woman's intelligence. I'm sharing this story because I want other women to know that if something feels wrong, it probably is. Trust your instincts, especially when it comes to your children. Don't let anyone pressure you into decisions that don't feel right, no matter how much they claim to love you or have your best interests at heart. And if you're ever in a situation where people are trying to manipulate you through fear or crisis, remember that the people who truly love you will never ask you to sacrifice everything you've worked for. Betrayal family supports your dreams. They don't try to steal them. If you're a parent, trust your instincts when something feels wrong with your child. It might save their life, like it saved mine. Comment below if you've ever had to protect your family from people you trusted. Hit subscribe for more true stories about survival and justice. And ring that notification bell because next week I'm sharing how I discovered my business partner was embezzling millions while I was fighting for my daughter's life. Your support means everything. Stay safe. Stay strong.